Hey, how's it going, everyone? Shauno here from Mako. How's it going? So, awesome. Great to have you back. Today we are going to be doing some shared reading. We have our fabulous team in the studio with me today. So, as with all the other streams, on comments and answering your questions and replying to you on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter, we have Paul. How's it going, Paul?
Hey, everyone. Good. It's been a great day so far. I'm really looking forward to this one today as well.
Brilliant. Yeah, so if you have any questions about shared reading and what we're going to be getting up to today, be sure to get them into the comment section on whatever platform it is that you're working on, or on social media. So you might be watching on YouTube, but you could always still get us on Twitter. So on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, our handles is Halton MakeFest. And we also have a hashtag. So if you make sure that you get the hashtag in there when you're posting about us, which is hashtag HaltonMF21. Look at that. I'm surprised that I've managed to get that right every time, but I'm doing all right. We also have Ian, who was showing off his mad skills then by getting all those graphics up in time and everybody else on the screen. So Ian is in charge of our microphones and our camera angles and things like that. And there he is. Big thumbs up from Ian, who's looking after us today. As always, get your complaints into Ian. The rest of the team, we don't want to hear them. But last but not least, we've got Andrew O'Brien, who is on our roving camera today, so getting some lovely smooth shots around the studio as we're doing different bits and bobs. And we don't have any guests in the studio today, and that's because via video link we are joined by Anna. How's it going, Anna?
I'm here. I'm actually in Liverpool, where I live. As you can see, I'm in my kids' bedroom with them downstairs, being told in strict instructions to be quiet. But anyway, nice to be here. I'm Anna.
Fantastic. So, Anna, you are from The Reader. Do you want to tell us a little bit about The Reader and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So The Reader is a national organisation, a charity, and we run a project called Shared Reading. And shared reading is about connecting people together through reading together. So we run shared reading groups all over the place, basically anywhere that will have us. We run groups where we read aloud. And as we read, we pause, stop, and talk about what we are seeing, what we're hearing, what we're thinking about what we've read. The groups are very much for people who wouldn't consider themselves to be readers. So I'm certainly a bit like that myself. I struggled with English and reading at school, but the groups are much more about what the story, what the poem is saying to you, and how that can be words that will help you connect and help you to live life well. So yes, that's us. We're called The Reader. Our project's called Shared Reading. We actually have groups in normal times. We've had groups in Halton libraries, in some homeless work in Halton, in housing associations, in all sorts of settings. So we look forward to the day when we can get running again in person. But for now, this is a great way to connect. So thank you for having us at MakeFest.
No problem. I was saying that I'm really looking forward to this workshop, as although I've done a lot of reading in the past, I read a lot of time at night time. I feel like I've been saying this in every stream, but it's been coming up a lot. But I do enjoy reading for pleasure, but I've never done any shared reading, and I've never really actually kind of expressed how I felt about something, out loud after reading. It's been very much a case of kind of, I'll read and then you might think about it a little bit yourself, but shared reading is something new to me and possibly new to some of our viewers and some of our listeners. And so I'm really looking forward to getting stuck in and having a go at doing it. If there was any other people that haven't done shared reading before, what would your advice for them be?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think my advice would be not to be intimidated, but instead just to let the thing that you're listening to being read, to let it just catch you, however it does. There's no right or wrong answers. It's about how you respond to what's being shared. I think at school I always felt I was going to get the answer wrong, but you can't get the answer wrong in shared reading, because it's much more about you and what you think of what's happening, or the character or the description that you're reading. Often a good place to start is, are there any phrases or words that you like? That, especially if you're reading a poem, I always thought, I could never understand a poem. But if you start just by thinking, are there any bits that stood out to me that I liked, or perhaps even any bits that made me think, I didn't like that, then that's a good place to start in shared reading.
That's music to my ears, the fact that there's no wrong answers, because that was something that I was very scared about during this stream that we've got going on. So I know you were mentioning before the pandemic and COVID and lockdowns that you were having groups, but I believe that you've also been embracing technology and taking your groups online. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. And I think, like a lot of charities, we've had to react quite quickly to the situation we found ourselves in this time last year, or just, coming up to a year ago. We've started just trying to work out how can we still continue encouraging people to do shared reading, but in different formats. So we've created a project called The Reader at Home, and there we provide opportunities to do shared reading, but in different ways. So we have some groups that meet on Zoom. We have a telephone project where people can receive a phone call every week and be read to and discuss and engage with literature. And that's been a really popular project, particularly for those who live alone or are isolated. And then we also have a weekly pack of reading that we send out, a sort of newsletter with reading in, and that you could print off. You could read to someone, or you could just read on your own. There's puzzles in it and that sort of thing, called Lifelines. So we've had to react quickly. We're still learning, and it's obviously been a steep learning curve, but it's still possible to do. I think, as lots of people are finding out, the pandemic has been a hindrance, but it hasn't stopped us. So that's great.
That sounds fantastic. I think actually we've got Paul with the website up there, so that can show us how you can get involved in one of those groups. Paul, are you all right loading up the Reader website there?
Yeah,
let's test my memory. I think is it the reader.org.uk? Have I got that right with the web address?
That's great. Yeah, so if you go to thereader.org.uk and you can look for where it says get involved, you can find a page called The Reader at Home, and that will give you links to groups that are running, to other things that are happening. I should mention our headquarters is in Calderstones Park in Liverpool, and I don't know, some of you may know Calderstones. There's a big mansion house there that recently the Reader was involved in renovating and restoring. It's been really sad to have the doors of the mansion house closed for a year, but there's also various activities that go on through what's happening at Calderstones, and at the moment things online, but over time things will begin to open up, we hope.
Fantastic. Yeah, well, it's great to hear that you, like so many other creative organizations, have managed to adapt your delivery and run some online things so that people can still get involved in it. And we can't wait for the time when we're able to meet up again in person and start doing the reading groups face to face. Fingers crossed later on this year, maybe, if things go well.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we're going to be doing a shared reading activity now. I'm going to be putting the text on the screen so that we'll be able to read along with us at home. But if you would like to download the text beforehand or now and read it along with us, or if you would like to download the text so you've got it after this session, if you wanted to keep looking at it and keep going over it, all the text that we're going to be working on today is downloadable from our website. So again, Paul will be able to get the Halton MakeFest website up on your computer. We'll have just direct people to where they can download the text from. So
I've got the link in the chat.
Oh, fantastic! Even better, the link's in the chat for you to be able to get to.
Yeah. Well, the link is there, but it takes you to a page that says it's not currently available.
So the easiest, well, if the link doesn't work, if you go to the lineup page, what Paul's on there, and then you find the Reader, which will be on today, Thursday at 3 p.m. And then we go on to more information and scroll down a little bit on the page. you'll see there's two buttons there they are, that are the different texts on the left hand side of the screen. So you can just click on those and they'll download a PDF version that you can save and print out, and there you go. That's one of the first ones that we're going to be looking at and using today. But yeah, I was saying in another one of these streams, I'm a big digital reader, so I'm going to be looking at a computer screen today, but I know that some people really like it on paper, so you can print it out yourself, you can make notes on it and things like that. Make it however works for you, whatever works for you, that's what we do. So, cool, where are we going to be starting today, Anna?
Well, we're going to read a short story together. And what I'll do is I'll read and I'll pause at various points in the story so we can just sort of catch up with ourselves and see what we make of it. The story I'm reading is actually from, I'll just show you this book. This is called, let me make sure it's in shot. I don't know, A Little Aloud. This is a book that the reader published some years ago and it's a collection of stories and poems that are sort of tried and tested in terms of reading aloud. So it's a great book. If you are caring for someone, or if you perhaps have a relative that you're only able to keep in touch with on the phone at the moment or on Zoom, this would be a great place to start if you thought, I'd love to read to them. And it's got extracts, and I'm going to read the first chapter today, which is, so you'll get a flavour of the kind of extracts they are, on all different sorts of themes, but just weighs into good conversation and that sort of thing. So I'm going to read the first chapter of that today, which is, the chapter's called A Child's World, and it's a story written by Catherine Mansfield called The Doll's House, I should say. Fantastic. If you are following along and would like to comment, please feel free to comment at any time in the chat. And Sean, when we pause, Sean will be able to share your thoughts and reflections, and that can sort of lead into our discussion. So please feel free to make any comments, whether it's, that you think it's absolute rubbish or there's bits that you really love. Just go for it, and we'll see where the conversation takes us. So this is The Doll's House by Catherine Mansfield. So I'll read a bit and then we'll pause in a minute and see what we think of it.
Brilliant. Let's go for it.
The Doll's House. When dear old Mrs. Hay went back to town after staying with the Burnells, she sent the children a doll's house. It was so big that the carter and Pat carried it into the courtyard, and there it stayed, propped up on two wooden boxes beside the feed room door. No harm could come of it. It was summer, and perhaps the smell of paint would have gone off by the time it had to be taken in. For really, the smell of paint coming from that doll's house, sweet old Mrs. Hay, of course, most sweet and generous, but the smell of paint was quite enough to make anyone seriously ill, in Aunt Beryl's opinion. Even before the sacking was taken off, and when it was, there stood the doll's house. A dark, oily spinach green, picked out with bright yellow. Its two solid little chimneys, glued to the roof, were painted red and white, and the door, gleaming with yellow varnish, was like a slab of toffee. 4 windows, real windows, were divided into panes by a broad streak of green. There was actually a tiny porch too, painted yellow, with big lumps of congealed paint hanging along the edge. But perfect little house. Who could possibly mind the smell of it? It was part of the joy, part of the newness. Open it quickly, someone. The hook at the side was stuck fast. Pat prized it open with his penknife, and the whole house front swung back, and there you were, gazing at one and the same moment into the drawing room and dining room, the kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. That is the way for a house to open. Why don't all houses open like that? How much more exciting than peering through the slit of a door into a mean little hall with a hat stand and 2 umbrellas. That is, isn't it, what you long to know about a house when you put your hand on the knocker? Perhaps it is the way God opens houses at the dead of night when he's taking a quiet turn with an angel. Oh, oh! The Burnell children sounded as though they were in despair. It was too marvellous. It was too much for them. They had never seen anything like it in their lives. All the rooms were papered. There were pictures on the wall, painted on the paper with gold frames complete. Red carpet covered all the floors except the kitchen. Red plush chairs in the drawing room. Green in the dining room. Tables, beds with real bedclothes, a cradle, a stove, a dresser with tiny plates and 1 big jug. But what Kezia liked more than anything, what she liked frightfully, was the lamp. It stood in the middle of the dining room table, an exquisite little amber lamp with a white globe. It was even filled already for lighting, though of course you couldn't light it. But there was something inside that looked like oil and that moved when you shook it. The father and mother dolls, who sprawled very stiff as though they'd fainted in the drawing room, and their 2 little children asleep upstairs, were really too big for the doll's house. They didn't look as though they belonged. But the lamp was perfect. It seemed to smile to Kezia, to say, I live here. The lamp was real. And that's where I'm going to pause for our first little break, just to sort of get a sense really of how people are finding it. So feel free to comment if you're watching and want to share how you're feeling. And also Sean as well, just to sort of think, what are your first impressions really of the story so far?
I really liked it. It's quite interesting. I'm so used to reading myself. The first thing is kind of getting used to somebody else reading as you're kind of semi-reading, following along. It's quite nice. It's very relaxing process.
Yes, it's funny. And you're right. It does take a bit of getting used to, doesn't it? Because it's, as you say, we're used to just sort of doing it very much on our own. So
the bits that really got me were the real descriptive bits where they were talking about the front door and the knocker, and particularly the colour green when they were talking about it's spinach green that they mentioned, and the yellow. Oh gosh, I can't even remember the word that they used to describe, but the way that they described it really stuck out in my head. I had a real picture of what they were doing when they were talking about those words. I believe that we've got some comments and some people writing in. Is that right, Paul? We've got some bits and bobs coming through.
Yeah, that's right. We've got a lot of people saying where they're from and saying hello and stuff. We've also got a really good comment that relates to what Anna was saying. From Helen, says she loves how Anna's reading at such a pace because she often reads too fast to miss things, so it's nice having somebody else read it at that pace so they can hear it and not miss anything. We've also got on Facebook Lynn saying she's one of your reading groups, and she's
yes, hi Lynn.
Into this. So we've got lots of comments coming through on different platforms, which is good as well. So we've got people tuning in from everywhere and commenting.
Brilliant. So just to kind of say that again as we did at the beginning, any thoughts, any ideas, anything you like, anything that you don't like, let us know in the comments. We're going to come back to you. We're going to let you have your say, and we're really looking forward to hearing your thoughts and your processes on it. Anyone with any thoughts on the reading so far, Paul, or just people letting us know who they are and where they're from at the moment?
Yeah, so it's more. I put a question out there as well about what's people's favourite authors, just to get the chat going. And we've had a couple of comments around saying there's too many to choose, so they can't pick just one. But yeah, quite a few comments just saying where they're from, all that kind of stuff. So at the minute, it'll build up.
Yeah. So that's great. So great to have you all with us. Brilliant that you're listening and that you are joining us for our shared reading session. As we say, any comments about how you feel about this reading so far, any bits that stick out for you, let us know, and we'll read them out and put them to Anna and see what she thinks.
And Helen, I think it's interesting. I think it was Helen what you said about reading more slowly, and I think that ties in with what Sean said about the descriptions, because I think when I'm reading on my own, I often hurry descriptions because I think I want to see what's happening in the story, and I don't slow down. But actually, each bit of that description of the doll's house just adds to it, doesn't it? The dark, oily spinach green.
Yeah.
The bit I loved, there's the bit about the congealed paint. So there was a tiny porch painted yellow with big lumps of congealed paint hanging along the edge, and I love that because you can really picture that, can't you? Just where paint's dried in a sort of blob. I love that. The sort of craftsmanship, I guess, that I know you're celebrating this week in MakeFest, of people's skill and ability to create such beauty from wood and paint. And
we had a fantastic session yesterday. It was around creative writing, and a large part of it was where you put your ideas down and then you might write the sentence. The doll's house was green, but then you go into it and really break it out. I really liked the way they mentioned smells. I feel like smells have a kind of a way of transporting you, don't they? Because everyone's been to different places where they smell, and I think that they can really bring up memory smells quite a lot. Like when you mentioned about the smell of somewhere or the smell of something, it can like almost transport you back in time instantly just by talking about different senses, not just how things look, but how they affect your other senses, like smell and touch and things.
Yeah, absolutely. There's the bit about the smell of the paint that was actually quite overpowering and horrible for them, and yet something about its newness. Sometimes when you open a new book, or you have a new toy, a child has a new toy, the smell is quite distinctive, isn't it? And I like, that word you use there, Sean, transports you. And there's something about the smell of this that, I don't know. I'm interested in people's comments whether this has transported them to a doll's house that they knew, or have perhaps, or had as a child, because all the little descriptions of it, the carpets, the tables, the beds with real bedding on. I was laughing thinking about the dresser with tiny plates. When my daughter was about 3, she had a doll's house. Well, she still got it, but I remember being obsessed with the tiny plates, because it's just something about the detail of someone has made 4 tiny plates for our sort of enjoyment and pleasure. And there's something, I don't know whether those listening, it sort of takes you anywhere to a specific doll's house, or perhaps someone that feeling you get as a child of wishing you had a toy like this. But this is obviously a pretty grand one, isn't it?
It gets me thinking, thinking about, is this an actual doll's house that the author's talking about? Has this really happened, or is it something that they've made up completely, or was there a doll's house and then they've embellished it, to kind of make it more interesting for the story? And I guess it kind of starts you thinking around that. How the creative process of writing the story happened in the first place. Is it from a real experience? Is it a borrowed experience? I wonder what the author's history with dolls' houses was and things like that. 'Cause there's so much detail.
Yes, it is. I know it's almost like they are describing a real doll's house they knew and loved, isn't it? And that description caught me as well when it talks about the door being prized open, and it's saying that is the way for a house to open. Why don't all houses open like that? And that sense of almost like the nosiness that you can have with a doll's house, of really peering into bits of people's houses that in real life you're not allowed to look at. I do remember once I was delivering leaflets with my daughter, and I was trying to get her to deliver every other one just to hurry the process along, and she would post a leaflet through, and then she just didn't get the boundaries of, you don't go peering into people's houses. And she would say, "Oh, mummy, you should go back and look at that one. They've got a gorgeous sofa in the front room." And it's like, children, I mean, as an adult, I would love to have peered at the sofa, but you just have to be more well behaved, don't you? But this sense in the doll's house of being able to be as nosy as you like. Yeah.
That's what it's a lot of people's favorite pastime, isn't it? Well, it was when we were allowed to go to coffee shops and things like that, you know, people watching and kind of like seeing what people are doing and observing them and looking at the different way people's move around and things. And I guess, you know, everyone would be, I'm sure you'd be lying if you weren't saying you've been on a walk and you've had a peek in someone's house as you've been going past.
Absolutely.
It's just too hard not to, isn't it, sometimes?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think as adults, we sort of pretend we don't do it, I guess, whereas as children, they can. I was really interested as well, before we read on, in this very last section of that bit about the people in the house. It says they didn't look as though they belonged, and it's discussing this beautiful lamp that fits perfectly, and then the people who are a bit too big and cumbersome for the space. And I was just reflecting on that, thinking, is there a sense of this sort of perfection of this house that the people themselves actually sort of ruin? That it's actually too perfect for real people to be in. And I don't know if that's anything stood out to anyone, but I was interested in that line. They didn't look as though they belonged.
It's really interesting that you said that for me, because I hadn't picked up on that at all. And you know, when we were talking about it and things like that, and so that's really interesting as well, is that there's so many elements of writing that you can pick up that might talk to one person but not to the other person. Because until you said that, then I was like, oh yeah, of course that happened, but I'd almost completely forgotten about that section of it. That bit didn't sing to me too much like other parts of it did. And so it is really interesting how you can, when you start deconstructing the text, there'll be elements that really stick out for you, whereas other bits you almost can kind of like not glaze over, but you know, kind of like read and take in, but then just move on past, you know, really quickly.
Yeah, and that's definitely, as we read together, that's a really nice experience of noticing what other people notice, and that often takes you somewhere that you wouldn't get to if you were reading on your own. Okay, shall I keep going with the story?
Get back up. We were just finishing,
so we were
just after the real lamp, wasn't we? The lamp was real.
Yeah, that's it. The lamp was real, and then it starts with the Bernal children.
Yes.
Page 27. Okay, as I say, feel free to comment as we go if there are things that strike you, or lines that you like, or bits that stand out to your thoughts that you just think, I don't get that, and why has she put it like that? So, the Bernal children could hardly walk to school fast enough the next morning. I'm just pausing actually, because that's interesting. We haven't particularly talked about what kind of family this is who've received this house, but we'll maybe get there in this next section. They burned to tell everybody, to describe, to boast about their doll's house before the school bell rang. I'm to tell, said Isabel, because I'm the eldest, and you two can join in after, but I'm to tell first. There was nothing to answer. Isabel was bossy, but she was always right. And Lottie and Kezia knew too well the powers that went with being the eldest. They brushed through the thick buttercups at the road edge, and said nothing. And I'm to choose who's to come and see it first. Mother said I might. For it had been arranged that while the doll's house stood in the courtyard, they might ask the girls at school 2 at a time to come and look. Not to stay to tea, of course, or to come traipsing through the house, but just to stand quietly in the courtyard while Isabel pointed out the beauties, and Lottie and Kezia looked pleased. But hurry as they might, by the time they'd reached the tarred palings of the boys' playground, the bell had begun to jangle. They only just had time to whip off their hats and fall into line before the roll was called. Never mind. Isabel tried to make up for it by looking very important and mysterious, and by whispering behind her hand to the girls near to her, "Got something to tell you at playtime." Playtime came, and Isabel was surrounded. The girls of her class nearly fought to put their arms round her, to walk away with her, to beam flatteringly, to be her special friend. She held quite a court under the huge pine trees at the side of the playground. Nudging, giggling together, the little girls pressed up close, and the only two who stayed outside the ring were the two who were always outside, the little Kelvies. They knew better than to come anywhere near the Burnells. For the fact was, the school the Burnell children went to was not at all the kind of place their parents would have chosen if there had been any choice. But there was none. It was the only school for miles, and the consequence was all the children of the neighbourhood, the judge's little girls, the doctor's daughters, the storekeeper's children, the milkman's, were forced to mix together. Not to speak of there being an equal number of rude, rough little boys as well. But the line had to be drawn somewhere. It was drawn at the Kelvies. Many of the children, including the Burnells, were not allowed even to speak to them. They walked past the Kelvies with their heads in the air, and as they set the fashion in all matters of behaviour, the Kelvies were shunned by everybody. Even the teacher had a special voice for them, and a special smile for the other children when Liv Kelvie came up to her desk with a bunch of dreadfully common-looking flowers. They were the daughters of a spree, hard-working little washerwoman who went about from house to house by the day. This was awful enough. But where was Mr. Kelvie? Nobody knew for certain, but everybody said he was in prison. So they were the daughters of a washerwoman and a jailbird. Very nice company for other people's children. And they looked it. Why Mrs. Kelvie made them so conspicuous was hard to understand. The truth was they were dressed in bits given to her by the people for whom she worked. Lil, for instance, who was a stout, plain child with big freckles, came to school in a dress made from a green art serge tablecloth of the Burnells, with red plush sleeves from the Logan's curtains. Her hat, perched on top of her high forehead, was a grown-up woman's hat once the property of Miss Lecky, the postmistress. It was turned up at the back and trimmed with a large scarlet quill. What a little guy she looked! It was impossible not to laugh. And her little sister, R.Else, wore a long white dress rather like a nightgown, and a pair of little boy's boots. But whatever R.Else wore, she would have looked strange. She was a tiny wishbone of a child, with cropped hair and enormous solemn eyes, a little white owl. Nobody had ever seen her smile. She scarcely ever spoke. She went through life holding on to Lil with a piece of Lil's skirt screwed up in her hand. Where Lil went, R. else followed. In the playground, on the road, going to and from school, there was Lil, marching in front, and R. else holding on behind. Only when she wanted anything, or when she was out of breath, R. else gave Lil a tug, a twitch, and Lil stopped and turned round. The Kelvies never failed to understand each other. Now they hovered at the edge, you couldn't stop them listening. When the little girls turned round and sneered, Lil, as usual, gave her silly, shamefaced smile, but R. else only looked. And Isabel's voice, so very proud, went on telling. The carpet made a great sensation, but so did the beds with real bedclothes and the stove with an oven door. When she finished, Kezia broke in. You've forgotten the lamp, Isabel. Oh, yes, said Isabel, and there's a teeny little lamp, all made of yellow glass, with a white globe that stands on the dining room table. You couldn't tell it from a real one. The lamp's the best of all, cried Kezia. She thought Isabel wasn't making half enough of the little lamp. But nobody paid any attention. Isabel was choosing the two who were to come back with them that afternoon and see it. She chose Emmy Cole and Lena Logan. But when the others knew they were all to have a chance, they couldn't be nice enough to Isabel. One by one, they put their arms round Isabel's waist and walked her off. They had something to whisper to her, a secret. Isabel's my friend. Only the little Calvies moved away, forgotten. There was nothing more for them to hear. And I think that's a good place to pause again. Fantastic. And just to give you a chance to share any comments that have come in or any thoughts from you, Sean, about where this story's taken us.
Brilliant. Well, I've definitely got some, but I thought I saw a thumbs up from Paul before, showing that we got a few come through. So I think we'll start with the listeners out there and see what they've come up with, and then I'll put my 2 pennies in after that.
Is this so you can steal some ideas from what people have been saying?
It's a good technique.
Yeah. So we've had quite a few comments coming in saying all the old terms being used and old words being used, and was the author writing in the 1930s, that kind of style. And there's one that's just come in now from Jem saying good text in order to talk about diversity, equality, sexism, classes, etc. In an olden society, and thankful how things have changed in modern times. So lots of different types of comments coming in. But yeah, that's some ideas for you, Sean, so you can magnify.
Do you know, genuinely, the question that the one thing that came to my head, it was interesting when Dave mentioned the 1930s. I didn't have a time particularly in mind, but that was the thing that was going through my mind. I was going, when is this based? When are we? What time are we? It clearly feels very different, I would say, to modern day. But I was wondering about the time, and I know that we've kind of. We're not at the very beginning of the book here, are we, and things like that. So do we know this type of information, not like we were reading the full book, or?
No, and actually this is like the admission of a reader leader, really, is that I don't know when it was written, and that I think is actually quite deliberate on my part, in that I am sort of trying to steer away from trying to analyse it through a historical perspective, if you know what I mean, and rather trying to get the words to sort of come alive in the moment. So I sort of deliberately steer away from knowing roughly when people have written. Although it's obviously clear this is not of our time, isn't it?
Yes.
But yeah, so you have to look it up. You have to Google it at the end of the session.
I quite like the idea of it being a mystery, but it is nice to know that that was quite interesting when they mentioned it. I was like, that was the thing that really kind of I was like, I wonder when this was. I wonder what time frame they go, and a brilliant question there, or a bit less of a question, more of a kind of observation about and something that I hadn't really thought about too much regarding the difference of classes and the way that they go into explaining that within the school environment.
Yes, and there's several places that comes out, isn't there? So there's this bit really almost from the parents' perspective, where you get this thing. So it says the school the Burnell children went to was not the kind of place their parents would have chosen. And the reason is because it was the only school for miles, so everyone sent their child there. And I think that's a really interesting and I guess quite modern in some ways, isn't it? That sense of parents' concern for who exactly their children are mixing with. So that sense that the judge, the doctor, the storekeeper, and the milkman all send their children to the same school, which with our sort of like equality sense, we think, yeah, that's brilliant. And yet it sort of doesn't feel brilliant for those who are at the bottom of the chain here, does it? For the Kelvies. Yeah.
One of the other things that I was picking up with and thinking about during that was the section where they talk about going into school and talking about this new dollhouse and getting the attention and calling court, and that element of when you go, I remember it really transported me back to primary school where you got that linking of arms and walking around and the kind of like fun and games that you have and kind of like being, I want to be this person's best friend, I want to know this and things that really transported me back to being into primary school.
Yes, and the sort of power play of that is quite terrifying, isn't it? Isabel, the older sister in the family, has got this ability and power over not just her sisters, but she knows she can sort of click her fingers in school now. She's got this doll's house way in to create. I mean, it talks about her. Oh yes, when they were late for school, and it says she tried to make up for it by looking very important and mysterious. But she's sort of playing a game there, isn't she? Trying to get, all the power in that situation.
I thought it was quite interesting when they mentioned about the children coming back to look at the doll's house, that they were kind of going, obviously they won't be coming into the house, but they could be in the courtyard. I think it's the courtyard and look at the doll's house and things like that. And just that in itself was interesting in terms of like the times.
Yes, it was. I think there was a bit there. It said, you just used the word obviously, and there's a bit where it says not to stay for tea. Of course, is like that. Is quite chilling in some way, isn't it? It's like, of course, we'll keep them at hand's length, these children, or to come traipsing through the house. It gives you a sense of what this family were like, and this sense of control of outsiders, But no, I thought that was really telling as well. It stood out for me, that sense of. Of course, they're not going to come into the house. They can stand in our courtyard. It's like, wow, thanks. What do you make, Sean, of the other family? So the Kelvies are obviously the sort of poor family. They're wearing hand-me-down clothes made out of other people's curtains and tablecloths. And what were your impressions of them?
I thought it was quite interesting in terms of how they're being described and I guess I was just trying to get my head around as who's describing these and how they have them. It's from the viewpoint, I guess, of one of the young people, I guess, as they're describing it. I was just trying to get my head around that. It felt quite cruel almost, to be honest with you, as I was thinking about it. I felt uncomfortable almost the way that it was being described, and the disdain almost in terms of the way that they were describing it, and the way they put it together, you know, from obviously something that is no fault of their own, and being children and things like that. So yeah, if I'm honest, it made me feel a little bit uncomfortable or not at ease as I was listening to it. Yeah, and not because everyone would like to think you're not prejudiced against people, and and so yeah, just kind of having that almost brought upon you because you're listening to the text. It made me feel a little bit uneasy as we were going through it.
Yeah, definitely. There were little asides, weren't there, that you thought, whose perspective is this on these children? It's almost like it reminded me of, when children repeat things that they've heard adults say, but they're not really, shouldn't really have heard it said. It's almost like all the ways it says, it sort of makes it seem so black and white and obvious that these children were sort of a bit hopeless, when in fact, it's quite a sort of sad section, isn't it? As you say, the disdain that comes out. There was one line at the very bottom of page 29, after describing them and all the sort of disdain that you read about them. It struck out this time when I read it. I don't think I've noticed it before. It said, the Kelvies never failed to understand each other. So it had this description of the little one tugging on the dress of the older one. And I thought, wow, that's actually an amazingly positive thing about their relationship, isn't it? That they really get each other. They're a real team. And yet there's this sort of, I don't know, it's like the rest of the world are looking on, feeling sorry for them, but have they actually got the best relationship in the story? I don't know. Just an interesting line.
That's great. I think we've got some more comments from some of our viewers on YouTube and Facebook. Is that right, Paul?
Yes, we've got a comment from Lynn about the discrimination against the washerwoman's family, and it's quite upsetting. And I'm sure some of the places I still have that attitude, and definitely shows people in a poor light.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and that sense, I mean, actually the description of the mum is that she's really incredibly hard-working woman, and yet that's used against her somehow in this description, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%.
And in fact, there's nothing negative about this woman who's going from house to house, earning enough money to keep her daughters, and but it does. Go on, Sean. Sorry.
I was just going to say, really interesting to see how it develops, because it really felt like they'd taken the time to really dive into this family. So instantly, I felt like there's a lot more to come from this family in this story, that they're going to be, part of it, even though they were just, because from that section there, they were just kind of saying they weren't really too involved in the bit where they were describing the dolls. I wasn't going through it and stuff like that. And so part of my kind of listening to it and thinking about it was kind of going, I wonder how they're going to become more involved, because it felt like there's a lot of description for them to just not be part of it at the moment.
Yeah, so what part will the Kelvies play in this? Well, let's read on and see what happens next. And I think I'm going to do this in 2 more sections, just so we can pause again before we see where it ends. So we're on page 30. I don't know if I'm getting a little bit of feedback from you, which is not bothering me, but just in case that's a sound issue from your point of view, but it's fine. It's not distracting me, but whether it's distracting
I'll get in to have a quick look, make sure that we're all okay.
Yeah, just in case it's affecting the quality, but great. So I'm going to start page 30 with the days past. Okay.
The days past. Right, let me get on there. Perfect.
Great. Days passed, and as more children saw the doll's house, the fame of it spread. It became the one subject, the rage. The one question was, have you seen Burnell's doll's house? Oh, ain't it lovely? Haven't you seen it? Oh, I say. Even the dinner hour was given up to talking about it. The little girls sat under the pines, eating their thick mutton sandwiches and big slabs of Johnny cake spread with butter. While always, as near as they could get, sat the Kelvies, or else holding on to Lil, listening too while they chewed jam sandwiches out of a newspaper soaked with large red blobs. Mother, said Kezia, can't I ask the Kelvies just once? Certainly not, Kezia. But why not? Run away, Kezia. You know quite well why not. At last, everyone had seen it, except them. On that day, the subject rather flagged. It was the dinner hour. The children stood together under the pine trees, and suddenly, as they looked at the Kelvies eating out of their paper, always by themselves, always listening, they wanted to be horrid to them. Emmy Cole started the whisper. Lil Kelvy's going to be a servant when she grows up. Oh, how awful, said Isabel Burnell, and she made eyes at Emmy. Emmy swallowed in a very meaning way and nodded to Isabel as she'd seen her mother do on these occasions. It's true, it's true, it's true, she said. Then Lena Logan's little eyes snapped. Shall I ask her? She whispered. Bet you don't, said Jessie May. Pooh, I'm not frightened, said Lena. Suddenly, she gave a little squeal and danced in front of the other girls. Watch me now, said Lena, and sliding, gliding, dragging one foot, giggling behind her hand, Lena went over to the Kelvies. Lil looked up from her dinner. She wrapped the rest quickly away, or else stopped chewing. What was coming now? Is it true you're going to be a servant when you grow up, Lil Kelvy? Shrilled Lena. Dead silence. But instead of answering, Lil only gave her silly, shame-faced smile. She didn't seem to mind the question at all. What a sell for Lena. The girls began to titter. Lena couldn't stand that. She put her hands on her hips. She shot forward. Yeah, your father's in prison, she hissed spitefully. This was such a marvellous thing to have said that the little girls rushed away in a body, deeply, deeply excited, wild with joy. Someone found a long rope and they began skipping. And never did they skip so high, run in and out so fast, or do such daring things as on that morning. And that's where I'll stop again, because it's only a short section, but there's so much in it, so much seems to happen, because I think, Sean, you were asking sort of what these girls' place might be in this story, and I don't know how you see it unfolding now.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely more interesting. You can see them becoming more part of the story. We know that they're the ones that obviously haven't seen the doll's house so far, but they're becoming more entwined. We're talking more about the school. I thought it was really interesting when when I think you mentioned before about them, that type of thing where they'll have seen a parent doing something and then reacted to it, and then in that next section where we hear them say, like the parent might have done, it was one of those things where you kind of like a key and a lock and you go, oh yes, of course, there's the author even almost like kind of like confirming that.
Yeah, it's really quite shocking, isn't it? But not surprising, I guess. Like it says, Emmy swallowed in a very meaning way and nodded to Isabel as she'd seen her mother do on those occasions. So it's everything that the girls are doing is sort of learned behavior. It's stuff they've seen done before, which is what you suspected, wasn't it, Sean? You were like, where does this way of talking about people come from?
I don't want to take the credit. I think you might have mentioned that one in terms of like that.
Oh,
Yeah, I'd love to. I steal credit for everything else, but this one's on tape, so I can't. Yeah, people will rewind it and turn me off.
The proof's there.
Paul, have we had any thoughts or comments through on either of the platforms about this section?
Not currently.
Not currently.
I'm checking everywhere, but we've not got any new ones.
Okay, we'll have a bit more of a chat then. But if you have any thoughts about it, maybe about how obviously the I think one of the main things that kind of stood out from that section then is the behaviour. That kind of bullying section that came through them, very hard hitting in terms of But again, a reality. It's nothing in here is not what at least I've seen, firsthand in schools and different places and things like that. It's a part of life that you probably don't like to talk about, but definitely exists.
Yeah, that's it. And that sense of them sort of really ganging up, and sort of, it's interesting. Both the sort of tactic of them gradually ganging up and then it all coming out through this girl. Well, it's interesting. She doesn't get a rise from Lil at first, does she? And it makes her go further.
I love that when she was so disappointed that she didn't get a rise, and we've not really seen. Obviously, we've stopped it there, but we've not really seen the reaction from this bit. We know that everyone else has reacted from the situation and shouting, but I don't think we've really come back to see how that's affected the young person herself yet that she was shouting
because
at.
all we see from Lil is the sort of quiet. Well, it keeps using this phrase, shame-faced smile. So it's almost like her response to most situations seems to be. The bit that I thought was interesting was the very last paragraph before I stopped, which partly why I stopped, because I'll just read it again.
Yeah.
Because when I first read it, I thought, I'm not sure why they've reacted like this, but it's something really interesting to talk about. This was such a marvellous thing to have said, that the little girls rushed away in a body deeply, deeply excited, wild with joy. Someone found a long rope and they began skipping, and never did they skip so high, run in and out so fast, or do such daring things as on that morning. So it's like it sort of set them on fire, but it's so cruel, isn't it?
It kind of comes back to that the last section where I was kind of going, who is the narrator? Almost the way that's written, the way that it's, I know that it's describing somebody else and not themselves, but it almost still feels very young in terms of the narration of it, in terms of like you're almost reading it from the eyes of someone that is young, watching it as well. But I've got to admit, I found it at the beginning of that paragraph, I almost was like, am I getting this? Am I understanding this correctly? And it was only kind of towards the end of it when it kept going and kept explaining it, I was kind of like, oh no, that's really what they mean. That's how they're pursuing it. That's how they're seeing it in that situation.
Yeah. And it seems to be something to do with them really doing it all, that sense of them ganging up. So they rushed away in a body. So it's like we've achieved something here together. But even the use of the word joy, you think they've done something so sort of cruel, and it's brought them so much exhilaration and joy and adrenaline, and
I think that's an interesting, like you say, that's an interesting word, because all the words you used then was adrenaline, excitement, even I guess I could imagine you could talk about like as that group of energy, that ball of energy as they're going around. It's the word joy. It just seems so sad that like joy is energy is kind of something that you could imagine with that, and a thrill. But joy seems like such almost a horrible word to say, like if something like that is bringing you joy. I don't know, maybe that's just something for me, but I don't know. It did seem to kind of twang with me when I heard the word joy.
Definitely, it doesn't sit right, does it, as you listen to it and as you read it? Yeah. The other person, just before we read on, I wanted us to touch on was Kezia, because we get a little glimpse of her in this section when she asks her mum if they can invite the Kelvies
Yes.
to see the doll's house. And the mum says, certainly not, Kezia. And Kezia says, but why not? And the mum says, run away, Kezia. You know quite well why not. And I thought, it's sort of hanging in the air. Who's Kezia? Why is she a bit different to Isabel? What she's sort of got a child's instinct to sort of be, I don't know, to reach out to the Kelvies that she's not been taught to have. So I'm interested in her,
Well,
really.
yeah, I mean, it's really difficult not to bring it back to your own experience, isn't it, when you're reading something like that bit? And I definitely know that I know families with sisters who are polar opposites to each other, you know, and things like that. And so you start bringing in all the things of like kind of nature and nurture and things like that, don't you? In terms of, you know, somebody could be brought up in an environment that doesn't necessarily respect certain people from certain backgrounds, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the daughter is going to feel like that as she's growing up and as she's having her own thoughts and things like that, or maybe it's that she's not quite at that stage yet, and she's just, you know, she's not, she's still very open and she's not been molded yet by a situation.
Yeah, that's it. And then there's that bit earlier on in the story where Isabel is described as sort of being bossy and the one who's in charge. And I wonder if what's her name, Kezia, feels a bit almost sympathy to Lil because she's almost experienced it herself by having the sort of bossy older sister. I don't know. It's fascinating though, isn't it, that their upbringing, as you say, is the same, but they've turned out very differently. But let's finish the story and see where the author leaves it. So we're halfway down page 32, in the afternoon.
Yes, there we are.
In the afternoon, Pat called for the Burnell children with the buggy, and they drove home. There were visitors. Isabel and Lottie, who liked visitors, went upstairs to change their pinafores. But Kezia thieved out at the back. Nobody was about. She began to swing on the big white gates of the courtyard. Presently, looking along the road, she saw two little dots. They grew bigger. They were coming towards her. Now she could see that one was in front and one close behind. Now she could see that they were the Kelvies. Kezia stopped swinging. She slipped off the gate as if she was going to run away. Then she hesitated. The Kelvies came nearer, and beside them walked their shadows, very long, stretching across the road with their heads in the buttercups. Kezia clambered back on the gate. She had made up her mind. She swung out. "Hello," she said to the passing Kelvies. They were so astounded that they stopped. Lil gave her silly smile. R-Else stared. "You can come and see our doll's house if you want to," said Kezia, and she dragged one toe on the ground. But at that, Lil turned red and shook her head quickly. "Why not?" asked Kezia. Lil gasped, and then she said, "Your ma told our ma you wasn't to speak to us." "Oh, well," said Kezia, she didn't know what to reply. "It doesn't matter. You can come and see our doll's house all the same. Come on. Nobody's looking." But Lil shook her head still harder. "Don't you want to?" asked Kezia. Suddenly there was a twitch, a tug at Lil's skirt. She turned round. R-Else was looking at her with big, imploring eyes. She was frowning. She wanted to go. For a moment, Lil looked at R-Else very doubtfully, but then R-Else twitched her skirt again. She started forward. Kezia led the way. Like two little stray cats, they followed across the courtyard to where the doll's house stood. There it is, said Kezia. There was a pause. Lil breathed loudly, almost snorted. R. Else was still as a stone. I'll open it for you, said Kezia kindly. She undid the hook, and they looked inside. There's the drawing room and the dining room, and that's the... Kezia! Oh, what a start they gave. Kezia! It was Aunt Beryl's voice. They turned round. At the back door stood Aunt Beryl, staring as if she couldn't believe what she saw. How dare you ask the little Kelvies into the courtyard? She said, her cold, furious voice. You know as well as I do you're not allowed to talk to them. Run away, children. Run away at once. And don't come back again, said Aunt Beryl, and she stepped into the yard and shooed them out as if they were chickens. Off you go immediately, she called, cold and proud. They did not need telling twice. Burning with shame, shrinking together, Lil huddling along like her mother, or else dazed. Somehow they crossed the big courtyard and squeezed through the white gate. Wicked, disobedient little girl, said Aunt Beryl bitterly to Kezia as she slammed the doll's house to. The afternoon had been awful. A letter had come from Willie Brent, a terrifying, threatening letter saying if she did not meet him that evening in Pullman's bush, he'd come to the front door and ask the reason why. But now that she'd frightened those little rats of Kelvies and given Kezia a good scolding, her heart felt lighter. That ghastly pressure was gone. She went back into the house, humming. When the Kelvies were well out of sight of Burnell's, they sat down to rest on a big red drain pipe by the side of the road. Lil's cheeks were still burning. She took off the hat with the quill and held it on her knee. Dreamily, they looked over the hay paddocks, past the creek, to the group of wattles where Logan's cows stood waiting to be milked. What were their thoughts? Presently, R. Else nudged up close to her sister, but now she'd forgotten the cross lady. She put out a finger and stroked her sister's quill. She smiled her rare smile. I seen the little lamp, she said softly. Then both were silent once more.
Oof.
And that's how it ends.
I've got to admit, I didn't think that was going to be how it ended. I was like, you kind of going, how's it going to be wrapped up? What's going to be going on? And I guess that's one of the nice things about reading and stories and things like that. You don't ever really know how they're going to wrap them up, how they're going to become. And I guess I'm just still trying to get my thoughts and feelings back together on how I feel about that ending.
Yeah. That's it. Is it a satisfying ending or not? It's hard to tell, isn't it? Yeah. It's interesting. It's the only time in the story we hear R. Else's voice. So the one who's been quiet and almost submissive and communicates by tugging her sister's skirt is sort of drawn out of herself, and yet you get this horrific scene, don't you, beforehand of the humiliation of these girls.
I guess it is interesting though, because it's so often when you're reading or you've got a story, you want in that kind of storybook ending, that you know, that go to like kind of like, oh, and everyone lived ever happily ever after, and everyone loved the doll's house, and it was brilliant. And in fact, after that, they all just became best friends, and they were there forever and ever. But so it's, in a lot of ways, it's very refreshing to not have that kind of standard ending, you know, and have something that you kind of get to the end and you can really think about and ponder on, and it not all be tied up and in a nice kind of like, this is, and that's how it ended.
Yeah, it somehow, it sort of lingers a bit longer, doesn't it, this way? Yeah, I found it even quite emotional, that sense of her being able to take the little lamp sort of almost into her heart, and after everything that had just happened and the humiliation of Beryl to these poor girls, she was almost able to like brush that aside because she'd seen something better. She'd seen this like bit of almost like I don't know what the word is, glory almost in this little lamp that meant she's able to say,
It was a really interesting ending, that, Joe. Like, I've seen the little lamp. It's so hard, I guess, to put it in today's language or an equivalent of today, because when they went to the school and they really sold the little lamp, didn't they? And you know how beautiful it was, and everybody wanted to come back and see it and things like. I'm just, in modern days, I guess I can't think of anything that you could take to school where it'd be that, you know, get that much excitement, you know, and that much gather from it and that much interesting. So it's almost interesting because it'd be strange to know if there's anything. If this could happen again today, do you know, like, is this something that would, you know, like, could happen again today, and how much in modern day have things changed in terms of classes and things like that, and how much people put on them and things like that. But what you said right at the beginning, there definitely is still an element of some people being like, oh, you shouldn't be speaking with them, or parents, you know, being worried about who the young people are hanging out with and things like that. So it's definitely not completely gone, has it?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And and what would be the equivalent of the little lamp for children today? And I guess it would vary, wouldn't it? But there's something. Yeah, sorry, Sean, go on.
No, I was just thinking that's a great thing to get people to comment about. If you think, what would this doll's house be in modern day? You know, what would it be that the young person had brought in that would, or maybe not in modern day, maybe when you were at school, what would it have been that would have excited you, would have got you? If you got any ideas and you were thinking, oh, do you know what, there was somebody that brought something in when I was in school that really got us excited, that'd be great to know. I believe we have got a question or a comment through, Paul, from our viewers.
Yeah, we've got two comments. One saying thank you for the reading, and another one saying it was beautifully read and very thought provoking.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you for commenting. And it's on first impressions, it's quite a simple story, but actually it unlocks quite a lot, doesn't it? I found the scene when Aunt Beryl comes out and sort of bullies away this little girl, and then it describes how that makes her heart feel lighter. It reminded me of the girls in the playground and the joy they felt when they sort of ganged up on Lil, and it seems to be this sort of like massive cycle being passed on, and yet something I quite often ask when I'm reading is there hope in this story? And I don't know, Sean, what you think about that.
Yeah, I think there's definitely hope. It was very sad at parts, particularly when they were describing groups of them and the general people. But you saw, was Kezia the younger of them that invited them in and was also, and so when you see things like that, you see someone that's, kind of, maybe it is the thing of youth where you've not yet been molded by the establishment or by your family or things like that, or maybe it's just a very independent young girl that's that's not taking like that, and she's thinking of having her own thoughts about it. So there was definitely elements. There was especially that moment where she was like, I'm going to invite them in, there was definitely hope and there was definitely lightness and, like almost like joy, and it's such a shame that that later on they get shooed out and you kind of like, oh no, we're back down to it.
I know. And she really decides that, doesn't she? There's a bit when she's swinging on the gate and it says she hesitated and then it says, then she made up her mind. Yeah. So it is like she's deciding to go against the way she's been brought up because she knows it's the right thing to do, and that's encouraging in some ways, isn't it?
I also think that there's the hope at the end, because obviously they do mention the shame and the bread, but that hope of I've seen that lamp, and that was a very positive. That's proper glass scene. The glass is half full, isn't it? I've seen the lamp.
No, but it's interesting, isn't it? That is what she says, and you think often something small can make a big difference to someone who's in trouble, like she is, really. So you think that's a lovely message, isn't it, for us? That how can we take the lamp out almost to people, I don't know, or look for the lamp ourselves.
Yeah, it was interesting that the way that she took it is, you can't take that away from me. I've seen that lamp now. It doesn't matter what happens else. Yeah. I've seen the doll's house. I've seen that lamp, and me being shoved away or shooed away, it doesn't matter because I've seen that thing that she wanted to.
Yeah, I love that phrase, and you can't take that away from me. She's got that forever, hasn't she? Yeah. That image. Yeah. So, yeah. I love it. I've enjoyed reading that. Thanks for those that commented, and thanks, Sean, for all your thoughts and comments about it, because it always brings out so much more to hear other people's responses. So
yeah, definitely, I've really enjoyed it. Like you say, it's so different to just when you're reading a book and you just kind of, one of the commenters put it really well, where they're saying that you're just trying to get through it sometimes, and that sounds like it's not like you're not enjoying the book, but you're kind of like, you wanting to know what happens next, you wanting to get to the next page, you wanting to really engage yourself in it, and doing this shared reading it and the plan stops in it and the re-going over it really kind of gets you to take it in a different way and appreciate the writing differently to how I'm sure that you've done these shared reading groups before in the past when there'll be books that you've probably already read or things that you've done where you just reading it yourself, and suddenly by doing it in a shared reading group you get a lot more out of it, or you pull things out that you wouldn't have otherwise noticed.
Yeah, definitely. And we do quite a range of different stories and literature. It's both old and new, and classics, and then things that perhaps people haven't heard of but are there's lots in. So they're a great place to discover new things, really. Yeah.
Fantastic. So if someone really would like to join one of your reading groups, what's the best way of them going around doing that?
Great, thank you, Sean. My email address I think can pop up at some point on this, and you really feel free to email me and I can forward you to what you most need information about. Basically, the Reader at Home website has got information about groups that are running, and then every Tuesday at 1:00 on Facebook Live, if you find the Reader's Facebook page, you will find a session like I've just run where people comment and listen and share. I run a weekly group on Zoom on a Tuesday morning for people in Halton, St Helens, Warrington area. So if you would like to just come along, meet us, join the group, have a go, you're welcome to come once and try it and see if you like it. It's a very friendly, lovely group of people. We read together just for an hour every Tuesday. So email me if you'd like that. And yeah, finally, just to say, Halton Libraries have in the past hosted reading groups and are really into shared reading. And obviously at the moment, we can't meet in person, but they are interested once lockdown eases and we're able to restart a shared reading group. So if you're thinking, actually, the online thing isn't particularly for me, but I'd love to be in touch once things start in person, drop me an email and I'll put you in touch with Halton Libraries once those groups restart. So yeah, that's all the sort of practical information.
That's brilliant. We love Halton Libraries. We've had them on earlier in the week doing some origami and book art with us. We've done creative writing. I feel like we've had a real like good literacy element in MakeFest this year. We've got so many interesting ones, and we were talking about poetry groups here at the studio as well yesterday. So it's brilliant to have so much kind of going on within the local area. So that's fantastic. If anyone would like to try a group, I'm guessing that a little bit like me today, you don't need to have any experience or anything like that to join these groups or anything like that, Anna?
Yeah, no experience needed. You won't be asked to. You can just sit and listen. You won't be asked to talk if you don't want to. You won't be asked to read aloud, although some people like to. So it really is go at your own pace, enjoy it. Some people who come have considered themselves real readers their whole lives, and others are more like me who sort of nervously dipped their toes in and found it actually was pretty good.
Yeah, so. I think for me, I'm dyslexic, and so I've always struggled with writing mainly. My reading age has always been pretty decent, but slow reader, and I guess sometimes one of my worst nightmares is almost the idea of getting given a piece of text and then going read that out to everyone, and you don't know what words are going to be in it, if there's going to be one that you don't quite know the answer to and things like that. And so it's fantastic to hear that you could join this group and kind of be really passive, like bystander and just listen to it, and or you can be jumping and kind of get your thoughts and feelings across. And so that's lovely to hear that there's kind of you can get as involved in it as you feel comfortable, and maybe that's something that can grow as you're doing it.
Absolutely, definitely.
Oh, that's brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been absolutely brilliant to speak to you, to get to experience shared reading. And yeah, thanks to everyone that took part, for Paul to reading out the comments and getting in there. And yeah, if you want to get involved in shared reading, please be sure to give Anna an email. Ian, could we get Anna's email up on the screen one more time, just to make sure that people have got it there? Anna McCracken at thereader.org.uk. And also, if you go onto the Reader website, which I believe is www.thereader.org.uk, you're able to find out more about their organisation in general, but there's also a section there about reading at home with, I'm sure, links to the Facebook live streams and the Zooms. The Facebook probably a little bit like this, where it's going out and you're just observing, where the Zoom gives you the chance to get more involved in it. Is that right, Anna?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So Zoom, you can see the other people as they're sharing, and Facebook, it's a bit more like this, comments and sort of seeing where it takes us.
That's great. Well, thanks again for joining us. Thanks to everyone that's taken part. We are back tomorrow with our final day of Halton MakeFest, when we are going to be joined by Hazelhurst Studio, who are going to be doing 2 workshops with us. We have Rachel, who's going to be doing bubble painting with us, and we have Claire, who is going to be doing some flower pressing, so it's showing us some of her artwork as well that she created. So a very exciting day tomorrow, and yeah, 10 o'clock in the morning for the first session and 3 p.m. in the afternoon for the second one. Thank you so much for tuning in and watching us, and we will see you all tomorrow. Take care. See you again.
Oh, thank you.